this is the lectionary for this actual week. We didn't change it at all. So it is John chapter 17, 20 to 26. And I have a deep and abiding love for bad words. And since inclusion is now in the top 3 bad words of 2025, I figured we'd do a Bible study about inclusion. There we go. This is the passage. Why don't we just start here to give us context? Because I tend to do these really long introductions and people don't understand why that's even being, what we're even talking about. So let's start here. Can someone read this?
I'll read it. I don't pray for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all may be one, as you, Abba, are in me and I in you. I pray that they may be one in us, so that the world may believe that you sent me. I have given them the glory you gave me, that they may be one, as we are one, I in them, you in me, that they may be made perfect in unity. Then the world will know that you sent me, and that you love them as you loved me. Abba, I ask that those you gave me may be here with me, so they can see this glory of mine, which is your gift to me, because of the love you had for me before the foundation of the world. Righteous one, the world hasn't known you, but I have, and those people know that you sent me. To them I have revealed your name, and I will continue to reveal it, so that the love you have for me may live in them, just as I may live in them.
Great, thank you. So in typical John fashion, you can read a passage and basically have no idea what it means. That is not unique to this experience. So we're going to try to put this in context. So let's talk about John. Okay, so the Gospel of John has a tradition of being attributed to the beloved disciple. In the Gospel itself, it claims to have been written by the beloved disciple. The beloved disciple is never named. By tradition from early church fathers, we associate this with John, the son of Zebedee. But about 200 years ago, when we started to actually study the Bible as an academic text, that kind of fell apart. So we don't know who wrote this. We know it comes from a community. And so there is a context here that has consistency with 3 other books in the Bible, what we call 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. These are 3 epistles. We know that they're not written by the same author, or else the author would be very, very, very old, just because it covers too long a time span. But they have a continuity in language, in syntax, and in thought that gives us the sense that they're all coming from the same place. Also, because we have these 3 epistles, in addition to this gospel, it's probably the gospel that we know the most about in terms of its context and like why it was written, to whom it was written, for what reason it was written, because we have all this extra material. And the other gospels, we just don't have anything. Like the closest to that would be Luke, because we have Luke and Acts together. But we don't really know much about the Roman community that produced Mark, or the Antioch community that produced Matthew in quite the same way. So let's talk about that context. Well, it's written in a very unique way. It's weakly related to the other Gospels. We don't know anything, right? We in biblical studies and religious studies, we never say what we know because we don't know anything. We say what we think, what we can reason, what we can support. So we think that when I say that we think something, it's not because it's weakly supported, just because I'm reluctant to ever say that we know something. People that want to convince you that the world is simple and that you should follow them to do very bad things will tell you what they know. People that are honest, that actually want you to be independent, will tell you what they think. So we think that the Gospel of John was very weakly related. Maybe John might have had access to some of the source material, but there's not much agreement that John had any evidence, or there's evidence that John had access to the other gospels when John was being written. And so that's very different from the other gospels, the other three, which were very aware of each other and copied freely. Like something like 40% of Matthew, of Mark shows up in Matthew, and about 40% of Mark shows up in Luke. Something really, really high, like word for word, word for word. And nothing like that happens in John. In fact, there's no birth narrative. There are no parables. They've been replaced by these kind of unique I am statements. So if you're ever taking a test and you have to identify a passage, what gospel it comes from, basically, if you're in seminary and there's an I am statement, it's from John. And if there's a parable, it's not from John. There's no Lord's Prayer in John. There are some unique stories, things that we think about as being archetypal of like Jesus's life. Like, what did Jesus do? If you ask the average person, an average churchgoer this, they would tell you a lot of stories that are only found in John, that are not attested anywhere else, like the wedding at Cana, when Jesus turns water to wine, when Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. No other gospel has any story like that. Or Jesus meets the Samaritan woman, only in John. So the fact that they're only in John is going to be something that we're going to pay attention to. Like, there's something unique about those stories that's unique to the message of John. They're important for the purpose. So when we try to ask ourselves, like, why was this written? That's something that we think about, or that's a way that we reason. Okay. There the gospel emphasizes Jesus's identity as the Son of God in a really, really kind of heavy-handed fashion. And this is what we mean by there's a high Christology. Like, a low Christology would be to emphasize Jesus's humanity, but to emphasize Jesus's divinity makes this very, very formal. And that's going to be important for just a second. So it's written at a time before there were Christians. In the first century, late first century, early second century, when the followers of Jesus were still a sect of Judaism, when they still worshiped in synagogues, as a part of the Jewish community, with just kind of strange beliefs, like Jesus. But it's a very particular time, and this gospel is written for a very particular community. We think that it was written in Ephesus, which is, you can see the red star on that map, in modern day Turkey. Very cosmopolitan city. So the very particular time is that we think that this community had just gotten kicked out of their synagogue. And it's actually they made a Greek verb for this in the text, in the Greek version. It's that they got aposynagogued, like they got outed of the synagogue. And that's going to be like the most important thing to remember about this gospel, that one fact. So this is a community that's still identified as Jewish, even though they were followers of Jesus. But this separation was total. Like, the religious life of the community was central to everything. So it wasn't just religious, it was social. It determined who their friends were. It was like being banished from the community. It was economic as well. It determined who they could buy and sell to, like where they would get their food from, who they could do business with. All of those things were just automatically cut off when this community got kicked out of the synagogue. And the reason we think this is because of these really kind of odd hints. It's really heavy-handed. Chapter 9, verse 22, 12:42, and 6:2, which all deal with like either a fear of or people getting kicked out of synagogues. And so we think that these are the echoes of that experience in the gospel. And we think that they got kicked out of the synagogue for believing that Jesus was the Messiah in a very particular way. Goes back to that high Christology thing. And this is sort of why what I said in the first slide, the characteristic of John, you could read something and have no idea what it means. There is an oddness to John, and that goes hand in hand with the oddness of the beliefs of these followers of this sect of Judaism. Everything about them was just a little off. And it's a sect that would later give rise to a kind of cult called Gnosticism, which wasn't only Christian, but was mainly Christian and Judeo-Christian. And that's kind of like the full blooming of like the weirdness of it all. It comes from the Greek word gnosis, which means secret knowledge. And I'll talk about that in 2 slides. But it's related back to that high Christology because it stresses Jesus's divinity. So Gnosticism in its full form would say that Jesus wasn't human at all, that Jesus was purely divine. And the fact that John, the Gospel of John, sort of starts to go down that direction, kind of, you can see the seeds for how someone would develop that thought to become later on that Jesus was fully divine and not human at all. That would be challenge Jewish monotheism, right? Because like the whole thing, like the central verse of all of the Jewish faith is the Shema in Deuteronomy, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is one, right? It's a call to monotheism. That is what set Judaism apart. And so presenting Jesus as divine, as fully God, um, might have sounded to early Jews as like setting up a second God. And that would have certainly been grounds for expulsion. Um, so, so understanding the raw emotional setting for this gospel is important to understanding the text and how it's being used over time. John is a response to a very drastic separation, a punishment by a religious authority exercising their power to expel a minority. Um, and John is only one half of this argument. We only get to hear the response from the minority against the authority. So it's angry because it's angry with Jewish authority, and it's angry with those who shared the beliefs of the Gnostics but weren't so public that they got kicked out. So it's very, very angry at both authority as well as other people that it thinks should have also been in solidarity with them. And this is kind of common, right? Anytime you have a persecuted group, they're angry about not just the oppressors but also the collaborators as well. Uh, it's also really defensive because it has to defend its legitimacy because it doesn't have power, right? It's the minority. And it's really quick to, this gospel is really quick to assert that its beliefs can sufficiently replace the tradition of the synagogue, right? Because they don't have that anymore. They're not just, a part of Judaism. They are separated. So they've got to really make the strong argument that everything we have is enough on our own. And kind of in a like Shakespearean protesting too much sort of way, it is very sure of itself, almost to kind of project insecurity. And it's really exclusive in its truth claims. It means that, that only people who agree with the message of Jesus in the Gospel of John are true believers. And, it's kind of goes hand in hand with that. Conspicuously in this gospel, John's Jesus does not tell us to love our enemies. And in fact, only commands Christians to love other believers, other people who agree with them. These are the hallmarks of a really kind of small group under persecution mentality. So the genre of this text it's a polemic. And nowadays, if that's not a word that we use, it's certainly not a word I use in every day. The kids might call this a rant or trolling. And basically, what you need to know about this is that John is a book that easily can be interpreted as reeking of victimhood. That's a problem. Great. That was the intro. You survived. So one of the features about polemics is that they tend to think in very binary terms. Us versus them, good or evil, saved or damned. So these are some of the different binaries that are in John: light and darkness, life and death, and light, flesh and spirit, above and below, belief and unbelief. What else do we have here? The world and God's children. So let's make a couple notes of these. When we talk about the world and God's children, the world, the way that the term the world is used is not the world and me as a part of it. It is everything outside of the believers, everything outside of the community of John. That's the world. So it is not good to be part of the world. It is good to be separate from the world. Those who are separate from the world are the children of God. Guess who burns in hell? In the same way, like all of these are not just like two separate categories. They're clearly categories with one being very good and one being very bad. And there is no middle ground in John. So it kind of makes sense that the community that wrote John was feeling singled out and abused. but this emotion seeps into John everywhere. And it means that someone could read the book of John and come away with the impression that the world is really constructed with these harsh binaries. And we know that's not actually true. And we don't go to a church that believes that this is true, or we don't, as a community at the Giving Circle, act like things are either right or wrong. It doesn't reflect how the world actually is. The world is gray, and certainly the life of faith is probably even more so defined by mystery and complexity instead of simplicity. And this is what's brilliant about faith. It's actually really hard to co-opt because it is so complex that no one can claim to have absolute authority. And that's really inconvenient for people that want to use faith to be able to command large crowds to do their bidding. So when you hear that these binaries being appealed to, someone's about to get had. So we know that the statements of binary categories in John shouldn't be interpreted as statements about how things really are. What they are statements that speak to the emotional needs of the community that wrote John. So we can have a little bit of sympathy here. They felt that they were under attack. They needed to hear that at that point in time, who was a friend and who might hurt them. And without that context, it's really dangerous to read the Gospel of John. So it's not a statement about how the world is, it's a statement about what the community needed. Unfortunately, when we read it without context, we kind of elide the two things together. Okay, so what is this worldview of John's community? It's going to sound a lot like Freemasonry. That's the hint here. It leads to what becomes Gnosticism. And before there, we are here in John's community. Gnosticism blossoms maybe about 50 to 100 years later. So we're going to ask, what is the Johannine community's worldview? Why was it controversial? What are the seeds for Gnosticism in John? Like, where do we see the bits of John that later blossom into Gnosticism? And where is Gnosticism still apparent in modern Christianity? Hint here, Gnosticism was declared a heresy by the early church, and basically all the texts were burned. The only reason we know very much about Gnosticism at all is because we have the arguments against it. That was true until 1945, when we discovered a library in Egypt called the Nag Hammadi Library that had a big trash pile of fragments of papyrus. And papyrus back then was so precious that when it wore out, you wrote over it. So with modern techniques, we could read underneath the top layer of writing, and we could recover texts like lost gospels, like the Gospel of Thomas, which is actually one of the most important Gnostic texts that now we have, but was lost for 2,000 years. So we're not going to ask the question about whether Gnosticism is right or wrong. That is something for the days of religious wars back in the past. It's not really important for us today, but it is important for us to be responsible for the ways that Gnostic thought is still operating. So with those questions, let's talk about this. So John's community, in opposite, like the other three gospels, let's start with like conventional Christianity. The other three gospels are really concerned about eternal life, and they connect eternal life to the forgiveness of sins, right? Salvation has this component of atonement, and Jesus is the one to forgive sins. Like, you don't get to go up to heaven wearing black, basically. Like, you got to be white as snow. And so that's the forgiveness part is essential to eternal life. John's gospel has a slightly different emphasis. It emphasizes belief directly in Jesus's identity as the Son of God and as the Messiah. And it's that belief alone which gets you into heaven. So there's no discussion about forgiveness of sins. There's no need to be in atonement, because it's belief that accomplishes eternal life. There isn't nearly as much emphasis on forgiveness of sins anywhere in the Gospel of John. So rather than like thinking about forgiveness and sin, we think in John more on the axis of delusion and enlightenment. People that believe the wrong thing about the world have the wrong picture of reality, and people that have the right belief, that have discovered the right thing, and that is a personal discovery in of the identity of Jesus as the Son of God, the Messiah. And it's interesting, right? Because whether you believe in Jesus, that's actually provable. That's something that a person can give material evidence for, as opposed to whether you are forgiven by God, which, kind of is hard to prove. That there's not a lot of evidence either way for that. And so you can see how a community that is really concerned with drawing its borders very clearly and knowing who's in and who's out, who's safe and who's dangerous, might appeal to this different way of considering who's in and who's out, right? Belief in God as opposed to forgiven of sins, as its core belief. It's like being in a club that actually has a password, right? Or a secret handshake. How did you come to believe in Jesus? That is not very straightforward. It usually involved some type of mystical personal experience. And that's why the Jesus figure in John's gospel is always having these one-on-one interactions and conversations with people. It comes from a personal connection to Jesus, what we might nowadays call a conversion experience. To become convinced of the admittedly kind of crazy proposition that the man who walked the earth as Jesus was actually the Son of God. That's the key to this all. And notice what it leaves out. It doesn't have any implicit or explicit call to moral action or the work of justice. John's worldview leans really heavily on salvation by belief instead of how you live your life. And that's going to be important in a few. When Gnosticism does finally take its final full-blown form in the decades after John was written, there would be also an emphasis on eternal life through personal belief in hidden insights about a hidden God. So they would have distinguished between two different gods, like a hidden God and the obvious God. And this is another reason why Gnostics got really, really reamed. They believe that everything visible, material created was the result of a very malevolent God. And some of them even went so far as to associate that malevolent, visible God with Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament, of the Hebrew scriptures, as opposed to the Christian God, which was this perfect, hidden, mysterious God that was the God of Jesus. So again, when you say that the God of the Jews is actually an evil God, you're really likely to get in hot water. And this is again why they got persecuted as being heretics. But it's this personal mystical experience that was the kind of the core of Gnosticism. And even though we can say, like belief in Jesus, that was a very broad category of esoteric knowledge. And it was really kind of difficult to nail down exactly how one proved that they knew that. That's kind of what made the Gnostics really hard to pin down. We already saw how John often categorized realities in these binaries. It's hard not to see how one of each of these pairs is bad, right? But John also created another binary in religious belief. John is the gospel to refer categorically in its narrative to antagonists as the Jews, over 70 times. And as you might guess, in John, the Jews don't get treated nicely. In fact, it's in the Gospel of John that you get the idea that Jews are the spawn of the devil. Because John is where, that's a direct quotation of chapter 8, verse 44. You are from your father, the devil, and you choose to do your father's desires. That's in the book of John. So even if the community that wrote John considered themselves Jewish, they thought that there were clearly two types of Jews. And you didn't want to be the wrong category. Those that did not believe in Jesus, who were literally the spawn of Satan. It isn't hard to imagine why these cheerful folks might have gotten kicked out of synagogue, right? Gnosticism would later evolve strongly anti-Jewish tones, so far as to, as I mentioned, associate Yahweh with a malevolent God. But it's ironic that at the same time, John makes more references to Jewish thought and scripture than any other gospel. It has been called simultaneously, paradoxically, both the most Jewish and the most anti-Jewish gospel. If you're going to try to talk to your Jewish friends about Christianity, don't use John. So who was Jesus in this gospel? In the prologue, verse 1 of chapter 1, we are told that Jesus is a divine being that existed with God before the creation of the world. Right? It says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word was made flesh in verse 11. And by witnessing Jesus' many signs and wonders, many came to have life by believing that Jesus was the Son of God. Chapter 31 of chapter 20, verse 31. So who was Jesus? Jesus was the Messiah, the only begotten, and the purpose of Jesus' life was that by believing, you might find eternal life in believing in Jesus' name. That's the Gospel of John. Gnostic thought would later say that Jesus was a divine being that took human form, and that Jesus took human form in order to reveal humanity having its own divine nature. So it's really close. So you can see how John goes to becomes Gnosticism. The point is, in all of this, is that there is a very different set of worldviews that are in operation here. So to just kind of loop John in with the other gospels and just pretend that they're all the same thing, you get into a lot of trouble really quickly because John has its own context. It really is the strange one. And congratulations, we're halfway through the thing. So let's go over the structure of John very quickly. We haven't actually gotten to the passage yet, but we will quickly. John has two bookends. There's a prologue and an epilogue. We're pretty sure the epilogue was added much later. We don't have proof of that. We don't have a copy of John that doesn't have the epilogue. That would be a really kind of smoking gun. We do have copies of the book of John that exclude one important passage. So it kind of suggests to us that it is later edition because we have full or texts that just are missing this. So it probably got added later. And that's the text about the woman caught in adultery, which is probably one of the most problematic passages in the Bible. It's the one where Jesus says, "Go and sin no more" at the end of it. And you're like, what the heck? How is someone supposed to go and sin no more? Is that an expectation that is A, placed on a woman, but B, that could apply to anyone? No, it was not in there originally. It got added later, probably by a man. So that's something to know about John. Okay, but the meat of John, the vast majority of it, is divided into these two sections, the book of signs and the book of glory. In the first book of signs, chapter 1:19 to 12:50, this is Jesus showing the world that he is the Son of God and the Messiah through signs and wonders. There are many of them. We would call them miracles. And it's kind of funny, in them, oftentimes Jesus explains what's happening to another person in dialogue, and the other person makes the wrong assumption, and the conversation pattern goes, Jesus says like, whatever, the person gets it wrong, and then Jesus uses that as the way to explain to them what went wrong. And so this is how John accomplishes the task of educating people, what these kind of hidden meanings are, by using a dumb interlocutor as the stand-in for the audience in these signs and wonders. Okay, so that is the first 3 years of Jesus' life. Most of the other gospels have a much more compressed timeline. The idea that we have 3 years of Jesus' life really kind of comes from the Gospel of John, because we have the Passover 3 times. So because the Passover only happens once a year, we think that the timeline of the Gospel of John encompasses 3 years of Jesus' lifetime. And that happens in only 12 chapters. So the next part, the book of glory, happens in a very short period of time. It starts right before the Passover. And in the house where Lazarus and Mary and Martha are, and it starts with the washing of feet, and what we call in other gospels the Last Supper. It probably isn't the Last Supper in this case, but the night before Passover. And it goes through Jesus's passion and death, and then Jesus's resurrection. So all of that is half of the book of John. Jesus's life and ministry is half, and Jesus's passion narrative, the book of glory, is the second half, essentially. So in terms of timelines, you go really quickly through a large period of time, through 3 years, and then things slow down. And we are going to be looking at chapter 17, which is right before the Passion, at the end of the Last Supper. In fact, chapter 17 is at the end of the Last Supper. Jesus gives a speech, a farewell speech. That's the long goodbye. It's a really, really long goodbye. And then it's like 2-3 chapters long. And then at the very end of it, Jesus prays. And that's chapter 17. It's the last prayer that Jesus offers, the blessing for his disciples. And that's where a passage comes from today. Okay. So we're here. This is it. Let's read through this. So I have 3 slides to get through the first bit of chapter 17, and the 4th slide brings us to our passage for today. So can I have 3 other readers for this?
Sure.
Cool.
We take 1 slide each. Is that what it is?
Yep.
Okay.
You grab this one, and then I'll go on to the next one.
Okay. After Jesus said this, he looked up to heaven and said, Abba, the hour has come. Glorify your only begotten, that I may glorify you through the authority you've given me over all humankind by bestowing eternal life on all those you gave me. And this is eternal life, to know you, the only true God, and the only one you have sent, Jesus the Messiah. I have given you glory on earth by finishing the work you gave me to do. Now, Abba, glorify me with your own glory, the glory I had with you before the world began. I have manifested your name to those who gave me from the world. Though they were yours, and you gave them to me, and now they have kept your word.
Great. So this is where this is why this second section is called the Book of Glory. Glory is not a word that I use very often in my language. In Christian speak, when we talk about the glory of God, we are talking about, for the glory of Jesus, we're talking about the identity of Jesus revealed in his passion, which means his suffering and his death and his resurrection. So this, when we talk about glory, we're not talking about something fun here. We're not talking about like unicorns and rainbows on a birthday cake. We're talking about the fully revealed identity of Jesus as being salvific through something very horrific and very violent. Okay, things to point out here, though, before we go on. We talk about, I've given you glory on earth by finishing the work you have given me to do. So this is an identity that is for the whole world, not just for believers. That's important here. Remember I talked about how when we talk about the world in John, we're not talking about the good folks, right? We're talking about sinners, the non-believers. So the message here in verse 6 is that Jesus's message, the idea of Jesus' coming to earth, it's not just for believers. It is for the whole world. That's kind of puzzling. That's sort of different than we'd expect. Everything I've talked about up to this point kind of sets us up for this idea that John is really for us, by us. But something is different here in chapter 17. It seems as if in verse 5 and 6, we're getting a different understanding of why Jesus is here. It's a message for more than just the believers. Let's go on to the next one. We're going to see this evolve.
Shall I read it?
Sure.
Now they know that everything you've entrusted to me does indeed come from you. I entrusted to them the message you entrusted to me, and they received it. They know that I really came from you. They believe it was you who sent me. And it's for them that I pray, not for the world, but for these you've given me, for they are really yours. Just as all that belongs to me is yours, and all that belongs to you is mine, it is in them that I have been glorified. I am in the world no more, but while I am coming to you, they are still in the world. Abba, Holy God, protect those whom you have given me with your name, the name that you gave me, that they may be one, even as we are one.
Okay, I've just highlighted something that becomes significant in when we look at this passage as a whole. But notice that in 9, what we just saw earlier in 5 and 6, kind of we go backwards, we backslide. So it seems as if Jesus in the earlier is being given for the whole world, but now in 9 he says, no, not for the whole world. I'm not praying for anyone else except for believers, but for those you've given me, for they are really yours. There is no uh, resolution for this. I leave this as an open question. The point is more importantly that I think John is a book that presents paradoxes that it doesn't resolve. And it resists a lot of easy conclusions. And so I wanted to start to point that out for you. Let's keep going. Eva, I think you're up.
Okay. As long as I was with them, I guarded them with your name, which you gave me. I kept careful watch, and not one of them was lost, except for the one who was destined to be lost in the fulfillment of Scripture. Now I'm coming to you. I say all this while I am still in the world, that they may have my joy fulfilled in themselves. I gave them your word, and the world has hated them for it, because they don't belong to the world any more than I belong to the world. I don't ask you to take them out of the world, but to guard them from the evil one. They are not of the world any more than I am of the world. Consecrate them, make them holy through the truth, for your word is truth. As you have sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world. I consecrate myself now for their sakes, that they may be made holy in truth.
So here we're starting to see a refrain. There is a coalescing idea of people not being lost, of people becoming one. And the binary between the world and the children of God is sort of dissolving here. We're not supposed to be taken out of the world. In fact, we have been sent into the world for the sake of the world. So this really kind of what we see throughout the rest of John, like clear divisions between light and darkness. In the end, Jesus is dissolving this binary in his last prayer. This brings us to back to where we started. So now I've highlighted some things that have developed as themes. I'll read again. I don't pray for them alone. I pray for those who will believe in me through their message, that all may be one as you, Abba, are in me and I in you. I pray that they may be one in us, so that the world may believe that you sent me. I have given them the glory you gave me, that they may be one, as we are one. I and them, you and me, that they may be perfect in unity. Then the world will know that you sent me, and that you love me as you love them as you loved me. Abba, I ask that those you gave me may be here with me, so they can see this glory of mine, which is your gift to me, because of the love you had for me before the foundation of the world. Righteous one, the world hasn't known you, but I have, and these people know that you sent me. To them I have revealed your name, and I will continue to reveal it, so that the love you have for me may live in them, just as I may live in them. Cool. So this is the full development of this passage, and this is where we've been building to the passage for today. The idea of unity in Jesus's prayer actually becomes the refrain. It's the one phrase that keeps on getting returned to over and over again. So even though John seems to posit this really rich dichotomy between us and them, like, the enemies and the friends, the saved and the sinners, in the end, what it seems that Jesus is most concerned about is that Jesus's relationship with God, in which they are one, becomes the relationship between Jesus and us. That we are one, that we are somehow united, and that this isn't only an end to itself. We aren't just supposed to be one for the sake or find unity for the sake of being united. We're not just supposed to close our ranks and be kind of a well-defined group, and so we know who each other is. What's underlined here in this last passage is the purpose of all of this. The point of why we are supposed to find unity, why this is Jesus's call to us, like of all the things that Jesus could have said in the end, all the important things that Jesus could have wished for us, his wish was for us to figure out how to deal with each other so that the world might believe that Jesus is the Son of God, Messiah. Isn't it odd that a sect that seems so intent in condemning anyone who is the other, in the end, captures and records for history the wish of Jesus, that the most convincing Christian witness in the world is the way that we treat each other. The one sect that seems so insistent that anyone that doesn't think exactly as they do is going to go and burn in hell, actually is challenged by Jesus in the end to recapture those who are lost, to find the world, not just believers who have already made the right faith claim, but that the world might believe as a result of the way that we treat each other. It's pretty amazing to me. It also means that this isn't just a statement about how we treat each other, right? This is theological. It's a vertical relationship, not a horizontal relationship. It means that we can only treat each other, we can only find our unity, we can only figure this stuff out to the extent that we are continually in relationship with God. So because God and Jesus are one, this is a vertical axis. This is why Jesus and the church and our ability to act with each other are possible. So our understanding of God, our relationship with God, is the thing that allows us to be able to find peace with ourselves. This isn't possible, this verse or this passage seems to suggest, without a relationship to God. And I mean, we know, like, figuring out relationships in communities that are very diverse is a difficult call. And it says that the place for that to start, the model for the world for that, of that, is the church. It's not going to be found through a United Nations peacekeeping operation, as much as they might try hard, very hard, but that we have a unique ability, a blessing, as well as a call, a responsibility to show what it means to be a united church. Let's go on. Wrapping up, starting to wrap up. So, inclusion in John. There are both societal and theological claims to inclusion in this gospel. On the whole, of course, there seems to be a lot of exclusive talk. But as I said earlier, if there's one thing to know about John, it's that it's a community that's in pain, that's responding to an emotional need. But an emotional need is not a theological truth. And the gospel writer is smart enough to be able to capture both of these things. And I think that that's what any church does, right? It's able to respond to the needs of the present, of the people as they are, but also point to something that's larger, that's truer, that's bigger than the congregation. And so we see in John a larger truth about inclusion of people that are very different than the Jewish community. We see Samaritans, who are the sworn enemies of the Jews, and Greeks. And more so, we see that when Jesus in chapter 12 is told that Greeks have come to meet him, his response is that his time has come. The sentence is now being passed in the world. Now the ruler of the world will be overthrown, and when I am lifted up to this earth, I will draw all people to myself. His response to Greeks coming to meet him is to reveal that his purpose is to draw all people to himself, all people. And it's not just the ones that we would want to be around. It's the ritually unclean, the poor. And there's a unique place in John's gospel for women. Mary, the mother of Jesus, Martha, Mary Magdalene, all of these people have really unique relationships to Jesus and unique beliefs. They are oftentimes the ones who most fervently exemplify the correct belief in Jesus' identity. Mary Magdalene is the first to recognize and to meet Jesus after the resurrection. Mary, mother of Jesus, is the one to demand the wedding at Cana, the miracle at the wedding of Cana. And says like, no, Jesus like, do your thing. And Jesus is like, no, I'm not ready for this. And Mary says like, do it. These are the people, and Martha in 11:27, like, is the one that perfectly encapsulates the belief in Jesus. That is the verse that tells us what we are supposed to believe. Women have a unique place in this as well. If we assume that the author wrote in a way that was appropriate for the original audience, looking at the fact that these diverse communities are important for the gospel, we know that the audience was itself diverse. Why else would you put this in there? And what I mentioned earlier, that there are parenthetical explanations in the text. When we see this in English, we don't necessarily get that, because we think maybe that's the translator putting in these explanations. It's actually in the Greek text that kind of common Jewish words like rabbi or Messiah have a parenthetical explanation in them, which means that this text was fundamentally not written for only people in the know. It was written to be approachable for people that didn't have the same context. So we know that this is a text that was inclusive in its appeal. And there's a theological concern as well. Here's the big problem for this. There's this verse, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to Abba, if God, except through me. That seems pretty exclusive. We know that John is not kind to people who disagree with it, to people who believe differently. So while it's easy to argue that John is on a societal level very inclusive. On a theological level, I think it requires a little bit more thought. And this is why I mentioned at the beginning, John doesn't have a lot of great fans amongst progressive ministers, progressive Christianity, because it is so binary in its thinking, because it is on face a little exclusive. But this is from a larger passage that starts with, do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. John chapter 14, verse 1. This is not a section that is written for triumphant folks who are looking to actively exclude other people. It is written for people who need comforting, people who have just been kicked out of the synagogue, remember, who have been told that they don't have access to the normal way of being acceptable before God. They don't have access to community prayers or sacrifices, even though the Second Temple has been destroyed. That's not there anymore. But that tradition, they've been excluded from. So this is responding to an emotional need. And in this passage, the author has put words into Jesus' mouth saying that you're going to be okay. Your way of believing is also going to get you to the same place. Jesus is comforting them that their beliefs also lead them to God, even though they've just been kicked out of community. It's not an exclusive statement, because the point of John is that we have to understand how power works. And if this were a statement from a triumphant, powerful authority, yes, it would be very exclusive. But this is a message written to a downtrodden minority who had just really kind of experienced a calamity. So this is a comfort, a balm, not a statement of exclusion. You could also say that this is a statement of Jesus's work, not a statement of Jesus's belief. When we say the way, this is about Jesus's example of living. What is a good way to follow? Jesus walked the way until he died. And the word for the way here in Greek is actually hodos. Like we get the word odometer from that. It means road. It is literally a pathway. In that way, and I'm quoting here, Jesus's way leads to God. But at the same time, it's a difficult road that has a cost and requires much patience. And Jesus is the truth because Jesus testified to the truth of God through his life. But this truth was not accepted in the world, and the Johannine community experienced that rejection firsthand. And Jesus is the life in the sense that Jesus is, in the book of glory, Jesus is kind of giving of self to God leads to eternal life. Jesus' surrender of his own autonomy led to the understanding of his place in the greater life. So this is not necessarily meant to exclude people. This is meant to guide people. Or that's at least one way of reading it. So the basic assertion here is that this is a big tent theology, right? Because we're looking at beliefs. That is a great feature of Johannine like theology, that somehow believing in God, like you can come to this from diverse contexts, but being able to believe these things is what matters at the end. And it's a really low bar in some ways. And I think that's part of what makes this so inclusive. Also, we'll look at another part of John in chapter 10, verse 16. I have other sheep that don't belong to this fold. I must lead them too, and they will hear my voice. And then there will be one flock, one shepherd. This is not a Jesus of exclusion. This is a Jesus of curiosity, of looking for even those that might be diverse in their beliefs, and Jesus calling them back. So I think that the larger message in John is more complicated. I'm not saying that John is necessarily inclusive gospel theologically. John leaves this really kind of complicated and open-ended, but it is absolutely wrong, I think, to say that Jesus in the Gospel of John is exclusively just very narrow-minded. It is a much more complicated picture, and I think that's important for us to remember. Okay. So all of this is really kind of cool because if you look at the logo of the United Church of Christ, if you look at the bottom, you notice that our motto is actually taken from this passage, John chapter 17, verse 21, that they may all be one. We are not only a united church, we are a uniting church. We came into being in the 1950s because of a belief in Christians that were very different from each other. The Christian Congregationalists and the Evangelical Reformed, one that descended from the Pilgrims and from Methodism, the other that descended from German immigrants in Pennsylvania, that the most important thing, going back to chapter 17, our Christian witness was to figure out how to be together, and that everything else was secondary to that. That's what the United Church of Christ is. So everything that we believe, everything that we do as a church is secondary, or rather is designed to answer the question, how is it that they can all be one? There was a pamphlet that was put into pews in the 1980s. And it was called What We Believe, the United Church of Christ. And it had these bullet points. It started with, the most important thing of what we believe as a church. It's not like Jesus Christ is the Son of God or like God is the creator of the universe. The first point in that, the thing that is most important for the United Church of Christ is that we believe it's important to figure out how to be together. There's a good story that I love, that at General Synod, we've developed this cultural practice. General Synod is our legislative body that meets every 2 years. It's going to soon be every 3 years, but for now, it's every 2 years. And we propose resolutions and we discuss them and we vote. And the practice is that when a vote is taken, after the vote is called, so after we know who wins and who loses, that there's no applause. And that's because we know no matter how happy we are that, for example, in a synod in the 1980s, gay marriage or not gay marriage, gay people were allowed to become ministers for the first time. That was really controversial. And the people that believed in that really were so excited that we could be the first denomination to be able to have gay ministers. We were the first denomination to be able to have females as ministers. We were the first denomination to have Black people as ministers. Even though we were so excited for things that we felt were so right, we knew that there were people that disagreed with us. And so applause would be triumphant and would be harmful to our unity. So the way that we figure this out is that we have these principles. How do we do this thing of all being one? We say that in essentials, unity. In non-essentials, diversity. In all things, charity. And by charity, we mean love. I'm going to just quote here. The unity that we seek requires neither an uncritical acceptance of any point of view, nor a rigid formulation of doctrine. It requires mutual understanding and agreement as to which aspects of the Christian faith and life are essential. The unity of the church is not its own making. That's pretty cool. It is a gift of God, but expressions of that unity are as diverse as there are individuals. The common thread that runs through all of this is love. Even what it means for us to be a united church, a uniting church, one that's in process of uniting, is diverse, that we can disagree of what it means to be a uniting church. But we do this because it is how we relate to God. And it's because this is the way that we are a witness in the world. It's not because we stand on a street corner and scream about Jesus. It's not because we love other people. It's because the way that we love each other is actually our witness in the world. So it turns out that one of our branches, our antecedents, burned witches, the Salem trials. So that's not a great kind of history to be able to harness when we are the church that says they may all be one. But I think that one of the results of this is humility, and that we no longer have tests of faith. We're the unique Protestant branch that has a statement of faith, but does not have a creed. We have no one thing that everyone must believe. So if you were to ask, what is the essential belief to become a United Church of Christ member? There is nothing. There is no test. And that was our way, I think, of never, ever experiencing a test of faith again. So we have no way of prosecuting someone for being a heretic in our denomination. And that's part of what it means for us to be a united church, that we don't say that there's ever one set of beliefs. Anytime we think that our understanding of God is the understanding of God, we know that we're wrong. So even though we have a statement of faith, it is, first of all, worded as praise to God. It is not a statement about us, it is a statement about God, but it is not a binding requirement of any church. We say that there's yet more light and truth to break forth from God's holy word. This is so well captured in our phrase, God is still speaking. And by that we mean that the sources of inspiration are everywhere, and that we are, even though we preference the Bible as being unique in its Christian witness, we are not closed to where God is active today, and we are curious about the world around us. The priesthood of all believers, well, this one is the hard one for me, because at a low bar, it says that all people who are part of this church are recognized as equals. Yes, some people have ministerial standing, but that makes them servants rather than authorities. But it still restricts our understanding of people's legitimacy to believers. And for me, that's a hard one. Responsible freedom. We are free to act in accordance with our perception of God in our lives. That means that our call to conscience of what God is calling us as individuals to do, we all have the room to do that. And if that disagrees between people, maybe that's how God works. And we're okay with that. And it's okay for people to disagree about what God is saying to them. These are the ways that the United Church of Christ over the last 75 years has lived into this call set out in chapter 17, that they may all be one. It's pretty radical that our theology is relational with each other, that we are a church that is not necessarily primarily concerned about getting it right in terms of our beliefs. We're concerned about getting it right in terms of our relationships. That's what our denomination is concerned about. And maybe that's why we were the first to be able to be socially progressive in so many ways. By the way, the term environmental justice, we coined that phrase because we commissioned the first study on the effects of environmental impacts on racially segregated communities. That was paid for by the United Church of Christ in the 1970s. We have been at the forefront of so much. If the Windsor case that legalized gay marriage had not been successful at the Supreme Court, there was an attendant case coming out of North Carolina in which United Church of Christ ministers were suing the state, constitutional ban on gay marriage, that it was actually a prohibition on their expression of freedom of religion, that the fact that they could not marry gay people was itself actually curtailing their understanding of their call to be authentic Christians. That's our church. It's pretty cool. So, just to wrap things up, we have, as a Giving Circle church, veered into the realm that is oftentimes called pluralism. And some folks think that's a dirty word, but it's not. Pluralism has been an idea that has been explored by our denomination since the 1970s, for 50 years. It is understanding what our beliefs are and understanding that other people have beliefs that are different from ours, and that we can relate to them based on this understanding of difference. And difference is about respecting how people are in and of themselves and what we are. We value particularity, how each person is, not how we think they should be, but how they are. It's not diversity, because diversity in itself is not a value judgment. Pluralism values diversity and says that this is how our communities are best expressed. It's not tolerance, because at the end of the day, pluralism can say no, especially to intolerant views. It's the strength of the United Church of Christ. The two main accusations by people who aren't really kind of careful with their terms are that pluralism is a belief in everything. It's not polytheism. And it's not panentheism either. And panentheism would be a belief of one God amongst many, as opposed to a belief in all gods, polytheism. It's the understanding that we have our beliefs, but that we are one amongst many. Doesn't mean that I believe necessarily in all of these other things. But it means that I respect you and I acknowledge you, another person who has different beliefs. And I'm curious as well. And this is why in our services, we're likely to find texts that are non-Christian in origin, because this is how we live out our call to all be one and our understanding that God is speaking in many different places. This is how the text lives for us. So to wrap things up, this is the last one. I just want to kind of give a warning. The Gospel of John has sometimes found an audience amongst those who think of themselves as outsiders, who find it very convenient to claim the power of victimhood because it was written by a congregation that felt themselves victims. And we should think about this. If we read John without understanding how power works in this text, we're going to miss how the gospel is the angry defense of a powerless community. It can afford to be ranty because it was also toothless. The community that threw the firebombs in John only had words. They didn't have political or religious power. And Christianity today has political power, especially conservative Christianity. When people in positions of power use the raw emotional anger of John, it's not very dissimilar than when our current political leaders claim the mantle of victimhood and persecution, even though they are actually responsible for the well-being of all. And this is when whoever the powerful identify as the enemy, the other, that's when those people get hurt. But here's the point. Just because you feel like an outsider doesn't mean that you are an outsider. One of the most seductive appeals of conservative Christianity is the claim to be countercultural. There's nothing wrong with that when it's true, but in the present day, when political leaders are mandating biblical values, when the 10 Commandments have to be displayed in classrooms in Texas and Alabama, and 20 other states are considering similar proposals, when Christian chaplains can replace public school counselors in Florida, and the Supreme Court is one vote away from letting public funds finance Christian charter schools, it's simply a lie that conservative Christianity is countercultural. Conservative Christianity is the dominant culture. A good friend of mine said the most positive thing that I've heard in maybe months, which is the liberal church finally has a reason to be. For a long time, the liberal church was the same thing as dominant culture. But now we are countercultural because we're the minority. And so it's a time for us to be very careful and to be very vocal. It's extremely dangerous whenever anyone claims victimhood. And anyone claims victimhood using a text like John to amplify righteous anger. The point is that studying John isn't wrong, but that it's a live wire. And because it's packed with so much vitriol, it needs to be studied very carefully. But the good news is that in some way, John resists the very ways that it can be misused. The open contradiction of exclusion and inclusion, which John leaves unresolved, is the opposite of the binary language it so often uses. The types of complexities which resist easy summaries or certainty is exactly in line with the mystery that John seems to be immersed in, and which is so easily ignored by people that use John to play a countercultural victim. So I want us to walk away from this with two things. One is about how to think about our unity as a church, but also to be suspicious whenever someone is thinking about John in a way that makes faith seem simple, that John is only about binaries, about being right or wrong, because that really isn't the message of this book. It is one of unity and one of complexity. So that's what we've got for today. And thank you for your time.